On March 3rd, 2023, Marcus Webb made a wrong turn that would change everything. The 42-year-old Uber driver had been navigating the streets of Houston for 6 years without incident, but a malfunctioning GPS sent him down an unfamiliar industrial road just after midnight. What he witnessed in those brief moments would haunt him and compel him to act. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus would document a pattern, gather evidence, and ultimately expose one of the largest human trafficking operations in Texas history. This is the story of how one wrong turn became the beginning of justice for dozens of victims trapped in darkness. Chapter 1. The Wrong Turn. Marcus Webb had been driving for Uber since 2017, navigating Houston's sprawling network of highways, neighborhoods, and commercial districts with practiced ease. At 42 years old, he knew the city intimately. He understood which streets flooded during heavy rain, which intersections jammed during rush hour, and which areas became ghost towns after business hours closed. Driving the night shift had become his routine. The pay was better, the roads were clearer, and the passengers were fewer but more predictable. Late workers heading home, couples leaving restaurants, travelers catching early flights. Marcus preferred the solitude. After spending his days managing the chaos of raising 2 teenage sons, the quiet hours between 10 at night and 4 in the morning offered him a kind of peace. The job suited him in other ways, too. After a difficult divorce 3 years earlier, Marcus had needed stability and independence. Uber provided both. He set his own schedule, worked when his sons were with their mother, and earned enough to cover his modest apartment and child support obligations. It was not glamorous work, but it was honest, and Marcus took pride in maintaining a perfect 5-star rating. He had learned to read his passengers quickly, recognizing when someone wanted conversation and when they preferred silence. He kept his car immaculate, always stocked with phone chargers and bottled water. He followed routes precisely and never made his passengers uncomfortable. In 6 years, he had completed over 15,000 rides without incident. On the night of March 3rd, 2023, Marcus accepted what seemed like an ordinary pickup request. A passenger needed a ride from downtown Houston to a residential area in the northeast part of the city. The route was familiar, straightforward, and promised a decent fare. Marcus confirmed the pickup, merged onto the highway, and let his GPS guide him through the sparse late-night traffic. Everything proceeded normally until he exited the highway. His GPS had always been reliable, but tonight something went wrong. The screen flickered, froze for several seconds, then recalculated the route. Instead of directing him through the usual residential streets, it sent him down an access road leading into an industrial corridor Marcus had never traveled before. The area was unfamiliar and unwelcoming. Warehouses lined both sides of the street, their facades dark and windowless. Streetlights were sparse, casting long shadows across cracked pavement. There were no pedestrians, no open businesses, no signs of life. Marcus felt the unease immediately, but continued forward, trusting the GPS would correct itself and loop him back toward his destination. Then he saw them. Ahead, parked beneath one of the few working streetlights, sat a white cargo van with its rear doors open. 3 men stood nearby, speaking in low voices. But what caught Marcus's attention was the movement inside the van. Figures, at least 4 or 5, sat huddled together in the cargo area. They were not moving freely. Their postures were stiff and compressed, and they appeared to be sitting on the floor rather than on seats. Marcus slowed his vehicle instinctively, his mind processing what he was seeing. The men outside turned briefly toward his headlights, their faces shadowed, but their body language defensive. One of them stepped forward, as if to wave Marcus along or block his view. Marcus did not stop. He pressed the accelerator gently and continued past them, his heart rate climbing. In his rearview mirror, he watched the men return to their conversation, seemingly unconcerned now that he had moved on. His GPS recalculated again, directing him back onto a main road. Within minutes, Marcus was back in familiar territory, the industrial area behind him. He picked up his passenger without incident, completed the ride, and returned home just after 2 in the morning. But he could not stop thinking about what he had seen. The image of those figures in the van, the furtive behavior of the men, the isolated location, it all felt wrong. Marcus sat in his parked car outside his apartment for nearly 20 minutes, debating with himself. Should he call the police? Or would he tell them that he had seen people in a van on a deserted street? Men were standing around late at night in an industrial area. None of it sounded concrete enough to warrant an emergency call. Marcus finally went inside, but sleep eluded him. He lay awake replaying the scene, questioning whether he should have stopped, whether he should have called the police immediately, and whether what he saw was as sinister as it felt. The rational part of his mind offered innocent explanations. Perhaps they were workers carpooling. Perhaps the van had broken down. Perhaps he had misread the situation entirely. But his instincts told him otherwise. Something about the way those figures had been positioned, cramped together in that cargo space, felt profoundly wrong. Something about the way the men had reacted to his headlights suggested they were doing something they did not want witnessed. By morning, he had made a decision. He would pay attention. If he ever found himself in that area again, he would look more carefully. He would document what he saw, and if the pattern repeated, he would act. Chapter 2. The Pattern. Over the following week, Marcus Webb became obsessed with the industrial corridor. He could not shake the memory of that white van, those hunched figures, those guarded men. During his daytime hours, when he was not driving, he researched the area online. The street he had stumbled onto was called Industrial Park Road, a 2-mile stretch bordered by warehouses, shipping facilities, and storage units. Most of the businesses appeared legitimate, but the area had a reputation for being deserted after dark. Marcus began deliberately driving through the corridor during his night shifts. He did not have a clear plan, only a persistent feeling that something was wrong. On his third intentional pass through the area, he saw activity again. This time, it was a different vehicle, a dark-colored SUV parked near the same warehouse. 2 men stood outside, and Marcus glimpsed movement inside the vehicle's rear seats. The windows were tinted, but shadows suggested multiple occupants. Marcus slowed, but did not stop. He noted the time, 12:47 a.m. He noted the location, the same block as before. He noted the vehicle, a black Chevrolet Suburban with out-of-state plates. He started keeping a log. Every night he drove through Industrial Park Road. He recorded what he saw. Most nights, there was nothing, just empty streets and dark buildings. But on 4 occasions over 2 weeks, he observed vehicles parked in the same area, always late at night, always with multiple occupants who appear to be waiting or being transferred. Marcus became methodical in his documentation. He created a spreadsheet on his laptop with columns for date, time, vehicle description, license plate numbers, number of individuals observed, and detailed notes about behavior and location. He included weather conditions, visibility, and his exact position when making observations. He wanted his records to be precise, credible, and thorough enough to be taken seriously if he eventually brought them to the authorities. The pattern became undeniable. The vehicles were different, but the location was consistent. The men conducting the activity rotated, but their behavior was identical, cautious, hurried, and deliberate. Marcus began taking photos from a distance, using his phone to capture license plates, vehicle descriptions, and timestamps. He invested in a phone mount for his dashboard and a better camera lens attachment to improve his documentation. He also started recognizing faces. One man in particular appeared 3 separate times. A tall figure with a distinctive gait, always wearing a dark jacket, always positioned near the vehicles as if supervising. Marcus photographed him from across the street, zooming in as much as his phone's camera allowed. Another man, shorter and heavier, appeared twice in the same role. They seemed to operate in shifts or rotations, but their function was consistent, overseeing whatever transactions were taking place. The more Marcus observed, the more convinced he became that he was witnessing something criminal. But what exactly? The figures in the vehicles were not restrained visibly. There were no signs of violence. The transactions, if that is what they were, happened quietly and without obvious distress. Marcus wrestled with doubt. What if he was wrong? What if these were just workers on late shifts, immigrants carpooling to jobs, or people using the industrial area as a meeting point for legitimate reasons. Calling the police without concrete evidence felt risky. He did not want to waste their time or make accusations that could harm innocent people. He had read stories of vigilantes misinterpreting innocent situations, causing harm through well-intentioned but misguided interventions. But the doubt never fully settled. Something about the secrecy, the late hours, and the repetition felt deliberate. These were not random gatherings. They were coordinated. The more he watched, the more he noticed small details that suggested organization. The vehicles always arrived within the same 2-hour window. The exchanges never lasted longer than 10 minutes. And the same warehouse location was used consistently, while other buildings in the area remained completely abandoned. Marcus also noticed that the individuals being moved, the figures in the vehicles, never appeared twice. The faces changed, but the vulnerability in their body language remained constant. They moved hesitantly, stayed close together, and seemed uncertain of their surroundings. It reminded Marcus of the way people look when they are lost, afraid, or not in control of their circumstances. On the night of March 17th, Marcus made a choice. He would follow one of the vehicles. He would see where it went, document the route, and gather enough information to either confirm his suspicions or put them to rest. That decision would lead him deeper into the operation than he ever anticipated. Chapter 3. The Discovery. On March 18th, just after midnight, Marcus Webb positioned himself on Industrial Park Road. He parked in the shadows near an abandoned loading dock, his headlights off, his engine running quietly. He had been waiting for nearly an hour when the white cargo van he had seen weeks earlier pulled into the lot. This time, Marcus was prepared. His phone was charged, his camera app open, and his resolve firm. He watched as the van parked beneath the same streetlight as before. 2 men exited the driver and passenger seats. Moments later, the rear doors opened. Marcus zoomed in with his camera and began recording. What he captured was chilling. 6 individuals emerged from the back of the van. 3 women and 3 young men, all appearing to be in their late teens or early 20s. They moved slowly, uncertain, and stayed close together. They were not handcuffed, but their body language suggested fear or confusion. One of the women glanced around nervously, as if searching for an escape route, but finding none. Another kept her arms wrapped around herself, her shoulders hunched forward in a defensive posture. The 2 men from the van directed the group toward a side entrance of the warehouse. One of the men unlocked a metal door, and the group disappeared inside. The entire exchange took less than 3 minutes. Marcus's hands were shaking as he stopped the recording. His heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment, he considered calling the police immediately. But he forced himself to think strategically. The van was already leaving. If he called now, what would he tell them? People had entered a warehouse? That he had been watching from across the street? He needed more. He needed to know where these operations led, who was involved, and how extensive the network was. He had just witnessed what appeared to be people being moved against their will, or at least under coercion. He stopped recording and immediately considered his options. He could call the police right now, but the van was already leaving. He could follow it, but he risked being spotted. Or he could wait, gather more footage, and build a stronger case. He chose to follow. The van pulled out of the lot and headed east, away from the main highway. Marcus waited several seconds, then followed at a distance, keeping his headlights dim. The van traveled for nearly 20 minutes, winding through industrial zones and eventually entering a residential neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Marcus maintained a careful distance, allowing at least 2 blocks to separate them. He memorized the van's taillights, noting a crack in the left lens that made it identifiable. He kept his phone recording audio notes, narrating the route turn by turn in case his memory failed him later. His adrenaline was high, but he forced himself to remain calm and focused. The van made several turns through quiet residential streets before finally stopping in front of a 2-story house with boarded windows and an overgrown yard. The property stood out from its neighbors, while surrounding homes showed signs of life with lit porches and maintained landscaping. This house appeared abandoned. But Marcus knew better now. Appearances were designed to deceive. The driver exited, walked to the front door, and knocked twice. Someone inside opened the door briefly, exchanged words, and closed it again. The driver returned to the van and drove away. Marcus parked a block away and photographed the house, the address, and the surrounding area. He noted the time, 1:34 a.m. He noted everything: the number on the mailbox, the peeling paint on the exterior, the bars on the windows that had been partially concealed by overgrown bushes. He photographed the street signs, the neighboring houses for reference, and took a wide shot showing the entire block. By the time he returned home that night, Marcus had over 40 photographs and 2 videos. He had license plates, addresses, timestamps, and a clear pattern of activity. He no longer had doubts. He had evidence. The next morning, Marcus contacted the Houston Police Department. He explained what he had seen, provided his documentation, and requested to speak with someone in their human trafficking task force. Within hours, a detective called him back. Detective Sarah Romero listened carefully as Marcus walked her through his observations. She asked detailed questions about the locations, the vehicles, and the individuals he had seen. She did not dismiss him. She did not question his motives. She recognized the significance of what he had uncovered. Detective Romero explained that Industrial Park Road had been flagged before as an area of concern, but without concrete evidence or witness testimony, investigations had stalled. Marcus's documentation provided exactly what they needed: patterns, locations, times, and visual proof. She asked him to send all of his files immediately and assured him that his information would be treated seriously. Within 3 days, a coordinated operation was underway. Chapter 4: The Unraveling. On March 24, 2023, law enforcement executed simultaneous raids on 4 locations across Houston. The primary target was the warehouse on Industrial Park Road, but teams also moved on the residential house Marcus had photographed, a second warehouse in a nearby industrial zone, and a storage facility linked to the same network. Marcus was not present during the raids, but Detective Romero briefed him afterward. What authorities found confirmed everything he had suspected and revealed horrors far beyond what he had imagined. Inside the warehouse, investigators discovered a makeshift holding area. Mattresses lined the floor, minimal supplies were stacked in corners, and locks secured the interior doors from the outside. 12 individuals were found inside, all foreign nationals who had been promised work and legal entry into the United States. Instead, they had been smuggled across the border, held in captivity, and prepared for transfer to labor operations across the South. The conditions were deplorable. The warehouse had no running water in the holding area, only a single chemical toilet. Food supplies consisted of packaged crackers, canned goods, and bottled water stored in a corner. The windows had been covered with blackout material, preventing those inside from knowing whether it was day or night. Several of the individuals found inside showed signs of malnutrition and dehydration. The residential house yielded similar findings. 8 more victims were recovered, including 2 minors. Documents found on-site revealed an extensive operation: fake employment contracts, falsified identification papers, and ledgers tracking transactions, a cold, clinical record of human lives being bought and sold. The ledgers included detailed information about each victim's country of origin, skills, physical condition, and monetary value assigned to them by the traffickers. In total, 23 victims were rescued across the 4 locations. Their stories were heartbreaking and disturbingly similar. Most had been recruited in their home countries with promises of jobs in construction, hospitality, or domestic work. They had paid fees to facilitators who arranged their travel. But once they arrived in the United States, the promises disappeared. Their documents were confiscated, their movements were controlled, and they were told they owed debts that could only be repaid through labor. One victim, a 24-year-old woman from Honduras, had been told she would work as a hotel housekeeper in Dallas. Instead, she spent 3 weeks in the warehouse waiting to be sold to a labor contractor. Another victim, a 19-year-old man from Guatemala, had believed he was coming to work in construction. He had been held for 5 days in the residential house, sleeping on a bare floor with 7 others, waiting for transportation to an unknown destination. The operation was not random. It was organized, methodical, and profitable. The individuals Marcus had photographed were mid-level operatives responsible for transporting victims and managing holding locations. But the network extended far beyond them. Financial records traced payments to contacts in Central America, coordination with smugglers along the border, and distribution networks funneling victims into industries where exploitation could continue undetected. Investigators discovered that the operation had been running for at least 2 years, generating hundreds of thousands of dollars in profit. Victims were sold to labor contractors, agricultural operations, and underground service industries across Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. The traffickers used fear, debt manipulation, and isolation to maintain control, ensuring their victims remained compliant and silent. 17 arrests were made in the initial sweep. Among them was the tall man Marcus had photographed multiple times, identified as a logistics coordinator for the trafficking ring. His role was to oversee transfers, ensure victims remain compliant, and communicate with higher-level organizers. His phone records revealed communication with contacts in 4 countries and 12 U.S. states, demonstrating the truly international scope of the network. The investigation expanded rapidly. Federal agencies joined local police, and the case drew national attention. Marcus Webb's name was kept confidential initially, but his role became public when he agreed to testify during pre-trial hearings. For Marcus, the aftermath was complicated. He was hailed as a hero, praised for his vigilance and courage. News outlets covered his story, community organizations invited him to speak, and he received messages of gratitude from people around the world. But he struggled with the weight of what he had seen. The victims' faces haunted him. He thought about the 2 weeks he had spent documenting the operation, wondering if acting sooner might have prevented additional suffering. Detective Romero reassured him. Without his evidence, she explained, the operation might have continued indefinitely. His photographs provided the foundation for search warrants. His detailed logs corroborated witness testimony. His willingness to come forward made the difference between exposure and continued invisibility. The traffickers were eventually convicted on multiple charges, including human trafficking, forced labor, and conspiracy. Sentences ranged from 15 years to life in prison. The victims were provided with resources for recovery, legal assistance, and pathways toward stability. Several were granted special visas, allowing them to remain in the United States while their cases were processed. Support organizations helped them find safe housing, medical care, and trauma counseling. Marcus returned to driving for Uber, but he never stopped paying attention. He became an advocate for awareness, speaking at community events about recognizing signs of trafficking. He emphasized that it happens in plain sight, in ordinary places, to people who believe they were pursuing opportunity. He trained other rideshare drivers on what to watch for and how to report suspicious activity safely. He also remained in contact with Detective Romero and the Trafficking Task Force, occasionally consulting on cases and sharing his perspective as someone who had seen the operation from the outside. His experience became a training case study used by law enforcement agencies across the country. His wrong turn on March 3rd had not been a mistake. It had been the beginning of justice for 23 people who had been invisible to the world, until one driver chose to see them. Marcus Webb's story reminds us that trafficking does not always look like what we expect. It hides in industrial zones, behind closed doors, and in the margins of everyday life. One person's decision to act can break the silence. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more true crime content. Your support helps shine a light on stories that demand to be told.